Thanks for watching. My name is John Vandeveer, and in the next 10 minutes, I'd like to summarize for you the paper in front of you. This is one of my recent working papers that has just been distributed on SSRN. So what's this paper about? This paper is on the impact of the coronavirus to social favorability to alternative credentials. Why do we care about this? I think there's three high-level reasons to care about this. One is an applied microeconomic reason to care about this. At the individual level, there are specific people that can really increase their return on investment to educational spending by using alternative credentials to get a job. Not only can they increase the return on investment from a financial point of view, they can also accomplish their educational requirements more quickly and get on the job that much faster. The negative side of this on the individual level is that the coronavirus could have nuked the value proposition for alternative credentials. It could have resulted in a social decrease to favorability. And let me unpack why real quick. Whenever people are exposed to almost anything over and over and over, this is something we know in psychology that their level of trust, comfort, and favor tends to increase. Whether that's an informational message that you see in political ads over and over, or if you're driving around the neighborhood and you just become familiar with the same landmarks. However, when there's a forced exposure that you didn't want, it's non-voluntary, there are a variety of negative exposure effects that can obtain. Blowback effects, boomerang effects, backfire effects. These are some of the terms you see in the literature for negative exposure effects. And nobody asked for the coronavirus. This is definitely a forced exposure to social distancing requirements. So it could go either way. And that's what this paper is interested in asking. When enough individuals are affected, this ladders up to some macroeconomic concerns. America has a student debt crisis right now. If alternative credentials are working, as we hope they work, this could be a tool to combat the student debt crisis. If alternative credentials have been inhibited, and moreover, what if traditional degrees have been inhibited and learning of all sorts, including K through 12? We would want to be able to anticipate a coronavirus-induced labor shortage or some sort of other negative effect and deal with that from a policy point of view. The third motivation for this paper is academic. So K through 12 has been researched, but the alternative post-secondary space is understudied, so meeting that requirement. So materials and agenda. Here's the SSRN link to the paper. Totally free to go download. It is a preprint edition. If you scroll to the bottom, you can see the appendix, which includes the questionnaire. Strongly encourage that. Link to the slide deck. It's the one we're viewing now. It's totally open. Anyone who has the link can go see it. And I encourage you to reach out to me on my personal website. Here's an About Me page. That About Me page further links to all my different social media pages. The agenda for this presentation is pretty straightforward. We're just going to go through the paper methodology, findings, and conclusions. We already really talked about the motivation in the introduction. So let's talk about the methodology. This was an online questionnaire design. I used Mechanical Turk to obtain survey participants. Then I sent them over to SurveyMonkey. They filled out the survey, submitted it, returned to Mechanical Turk, and got paid. This is a cross-sectional study, so one administration and a sample size of 350. I investigated the response data using ordinary least squares and also IRLS, iteratively reweighted least squares. If you're familiar with my other papers, then the second one is sort of a kind of a novel thing in this paper. It was fun to do. And this is a tool that in a perfectly unbiased sample will give you the same results as OLS, but it is a nice tool to use in a skewed data set, and it did turn out that this data set was skewed. I had lots of sociological controls, including gender, education, age, income, and so on. I have 3 questions that are specific on coronavirus, and I was sure to add questions that can be used to establish causality. So let's talk about the dependent variable, which is hireability. This is a 10-point Likert type measure of the willingness to hire on the basis of an alternative credential. Here you can see an elaborated definition of what I mean by an alternative credential, including 5 specific examples. But to sum it up in one word, I'm talking about unaccredited. Unaccredited credentials that are competition with the traditional 4-year college degree. We specify an entry-level position because a more senior position is going to have a more onerous degree requirement. And also because if you do get the entry-level position, then you're going to be able to leverage employer tuition reimbursement to go get a degree at a lower cost basis, and so a higher return to your cash out of pocket. So it's an index of likeliness to expend a job offer. This is similar to a willingness to pay, but it's a non-price measure, and that's important. So here are 7 reasons that I wouldn't want to use a price measure. I'll just call out 2. One is to avoid the price curve shape assumptions. So prices are backward bending when it comes to wages and your willingness to hire. So if you are an alternatively educated individual that is trying to optimize on getting a job, then you're not so interested in a dependent variable, which is price. You want to know if you're going to get hired. The second concern here is principal agent problems. So when we're talking about salary offers, we're not talking about my willingness to spend my own money in sort of the normal way we would talk about economics. We're talking about my willingness to spend my company's money. To make that problem even more complex, a bunch of respondents have never been managers. So for them to try and establish a salary that they're willing to pay is just a really hard problem. So what did we find with this coronavirus study? We found causal evidence that coronavirus-induced remote activity increased favorability to said remote activity. Remote activity, in turn, has a really strong positive correlation with favorability to alternative credentials. And so this did increase favorability to alternative credentials as well. As a really cool side note, an independent study that just came out today, and it was talked about in Inside Higher Ed, link right here in the slide. This study independently replicated my findings that people are increasing demand for remote education, given the situation they've been forced into from the pandemic. A third thing that I found was that state and industry effects do matter. And it's sort of interesting what didn't matter. Gender, age, income, ethnicity, and some other factors were insignificant. And I think this kind of speaks to some of the diversity benefits you get from a labor pool that's alternatively educated. Conclusions for policy. One is we could just stop subsidizing student loans. You get what you pay for. If you really want to attack the debt crisis head on, stop subsidizing student loans. As a second best, you can level the playing field and open those student loans to unaccredited providers. You can also remove institutional accreditation. Many people don't know that the accreditation system we have today came out of the free market, and then the government sort of adopted it. It could easily be returned, and it could continue on business as usual. For firms, let's drop the degree requirement. Support remote work and remote education. With universities, they can leverage partnerships with private learning providers to accomplish giving credit to students for their skills without needing to get a policy change. That's called hybridization. Highly recommend it. Consumers, just be confident that alternative education favorability is high today in the midst of the pandemic. And even though this study is cross-sectional, I do give in the conclusion of the paper some reasons to think that it will remain stable over time. Last, a conclusion for some of the academics. The results in this study were consistent with other findings in the K-12 space that suggested that alternative education in the K-12 space flourished during the pandemic. Corey DeAngelis is a scholar you can look into for some academic references in this regard. Here's a big to-do that came out of this paper is that we need to look more deeply into state policy effects. If states are laboratories of policy, and if state effects do matter as I document, the question becomes why? And I don't really have a good answer for that. There's no really obvious patterns that emerged out of the states that I did see have significant effects. So that's all I have for you. Thanks so much for watching, hopefully for sharing. My YouTube channel is focused on economics, philosophy, programming, and gaming. Those are all personal interests of mine, and if they pique your interest, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Tell your kids' mom and wife, bring your dog out over to my house. Maybe not that last one. Honestly, just hope you have a great rest of your day, and thanks for watching.